They blocked her from boarding, questioned her ticket, and called for backup, all while ignoring the fact that she held the keys to a $250 million contract with their airline. There was nothing out of place about Jhon Emily that morning. Her suit was pressed, her collar sat perfectly on her neck. She moved through Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta's Terminal C like someone used to early mornings and late meetings. In her left hand, she held a sleek leather garment bag. In her right, a first-class boarding pass bound for Chicago. She was flying out for the National Aviation Summit, where she was scheduled to deliver the keynote speech. Jhon had done this routine too many times to count. She wasn't the kind of woman who needed attention, she preferred quiet efficiency. But that morning, something snapped in the air the moment she reached Gate 12. The line to board hadn't yet formed. A few people were hovering nearby, sipping coffee, scrolling their phones. Jhon walked up to the desk, gave a polite nod to the young man at the gate, and handed him her boarding pass. He didn't scan it. Instead, he looked up at her, then looked again, slower this time, the kind of look people give when they're not sure whether to speak or stall. Jhon waited, no rush in her posture, no question in her eyes. "This lane is for premium passengers only," he said, with a sharpness that didn't match the situation. "I know," Jhon said evenly. He blinked, scanned the boarding pass finally, and paused. His hand hovered over the scanner but didn't click. Instead, he looked back at her, then to a colleague behind him, whispering something that made the other man peek over his shoulder. Jhon didn't flinch. The gate agent turned back. "I'm going to need to see some ID," he said. She tilted her head just slightly. "You don't usually ask for ID when scanning a pass. Is there a problem?" He hesitated. "It's just a security measure. There was no policy requiring ID checks at the gate. She knew it, so did he." She pulled her wallet from her inside pocket, handed over her license. He held it like he didn't know what to do with it, then placed it awkwardly on the desk without scanning anything. "Wait here for a moment." Jhon glanced down at the pass. Her name was printed clearly, Jhon Emily. She said nothing. The gate agent walked a few steps away and whispered again, this time to someone in a dark uniform. Within moments, a security officer was walking toward them. Jhon had experienced this before, not often, but enough. The sudden switch from professionalism to suspicion, the moment someone decided she didn't belong, not because of anything she said or did, just because they couldn't imagine someone like her in first class. The security officer didn't ask questions. He stood beside Jhon without speaking, his eyes tracking her like a risk assessment checklist. Jhon, still calm, stepped back from the gate and moved to the side, away from the boarding lane. She wasn't going to argue. She wasn't going to raise her voice. She wasn't going to give them the performance they were hoping for. Instead, she reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and made a single call. It rang once, twice, then, "Leona, it's me. I need you to pull up the fuel supply contract we signed with Atlanta Air 3 weeks ago, the one covering their southern routes. Yeah, I'm standing at Hartsfield-Jackson, gate 12. I'll hold." She stayed on the line, eyes fixed straight ahead, no emotion, no visible frustration. The gate agent glanced over, realizing she was still there. He leaned into the mic on the desk. "We're just working through a minor issue," he said to the crowd of passengers now beginning to line up behind her. "Thanks for your patience." But no one was being patient. A businessman in a gray pullover leaned forward to whisper, "Is she causing trouble or something?" Jhon heard it. She didn't turn around. Leona's voice returned on the phone. "Got it. You want me to call corporate or—" "No," she said softly. "Just flag it. I think they're about to recognize a problem." She hung up and slipped the phone back into her pocket. The boarding pass was still in her hand. She stood calmly, as if waiting for an elevator. But that call wasn't to complain. It was to warn. Jhon Emily didn't always wear tailored suits or fly first class. She grew up in Macon, Georgia, in a house with creaky floorboards and loud mornings. Her mother, Clara, worked as a school bus driver, while her father, Samuel, rotated between night shifts at a warehouse and weekends fixing neighbors' cars. They didn't have much, but there was always food on the table, and Jhon was taught early that the way you carry yourself matters. At 15, she was up at 5 a.m. on Saturdays, helping her mother sort through schedules and route maps before the school day started. It was where she learned to read a timetable by touch, how to spot a delay from 10 feet away, and most importantly, how to talk to people, not talk at them, talk to them. There's a difference, and Jhon figured it out fast. By 23, she'd graduated from Spelman College with a degree in business administration and exactly $300 to her name. Her first job was as a ticketing agent at a small regional airport just outside Savannah. She didn't have a corner office, not even a desk, just a counter, a headset, and enough determination to handle passenger complaints like they were puzzles. The real shift happened in her late 20s when she spotted a gap no one else was paying attention to. Efficient, sustainable fuel supply chains that could scale to meet airline demands without sacrificing reliability. Not boutique, not experimental, just real fuel, delivered fast with minimal waste. Emily Aviation Solutions was born in a rented office with one client and a laptop that crashed twice a week. She made deals directly with refineries across the Southeast and slowly built a network. It took nearly a decade before her company got a seat at the table with national carriers. Today, Emily Aviation Solutions supplies fuel to over 30 major airlines, 5 regional airports, and most recently, Atlanta Air. The airline had come to her. They were looking to overhaul their fuel logistics after a string of delays and bad press about inefficiencies. Jhon didn't pitch, she listened. Then she gave them a plan, optimized fuel delivery rotations, direct refinery to airline sourcing, and logistics that cut downtime by half. They signed a $250 million contract. But Jhon never lost sight of who she was. She didn't decorate her office with awards or hang plaques in the lobby. If you walked into her building in Atlanta, you'd see framed photos of her first ticketing counter and a wall covered in thank you notes from pilots. Her assistant Leona handled the logistics. Jhon handled the people. She also didn't like drama. She avoided attention, and above all, didn't talk about power. She just used it quietly when needed. So when the gate agent at Hartsfield-Jackson scanned her face more than her boarding pass, and the security guard treated her like a potential problem instead of a paying customer, it wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a reminder that it didn't matter how many contracts she signed or how many planes she helped fuel. Some people only see what they expect to see, and when you don't fit the image they've built in their heads, they start looking for reasons to question you. But Jhon didn't need to raise her voice to prove her worth. She had spent a lifetime letting her actions do the speaking. That call she made at Gate 12, that wasn't the beginning of a problem. That was her offering the airline a chance to fix it quietly. Because while Jhon Emily believed in grace, she also believed in standards. But none of that mattered at Gate 12. The man at the gate didn't know who Jhon Emily was. To him, she was just another name on a boarding pass. He didn't recognize one he'd decided didn't belong in the line she was in. His name was William, early 30s, new to the job, and eager to prove himself after transferring from Birmingham to Atlanta a month prior. He had strict instructions: maintain order, stick to protocol, and don't let anyone push boundaries. But what he lacked was experience and instincts, the kind that help you read a room or a person without jumping to conclusions. By now, passengers were lining up. A man in a navy windbreaker with a Bluetooth headset paced near the front. A woman with a floral carry-on stood behind him, eyeing the delay. William adjusted the mic on his collar and muttered something into it about needing backup. He glanced back at Jhon, who stood off to the side, relaxed but still present. His coworker, Lucas, leaned over. "Is there actually an issue?" William shrugged. "He says she's first class." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Her pass says she is. What's the problem?" William frowned. "Just doesn't feel right." That's when Lucas's posture shifted, not dramatically, just enough to send a message: be careful. But William wasn't paying attention. He was focused on his screen now, pretending to search for a booking note that didn't exist. The security officer, meanwhile, stood by with arms crossed, glancing at Jhon from time to time, but offering no explanation for his presence. Passengers continued to board. The first-class lane was thinning. William glanced toward the gate. He looked nervous now, but didn't want to lose face. Then John's phone rang. She stepped a few feet farther away to answer it. Leona's voice was steady. "Okay, I've already sent an alert to their regional VP. I also looped in Marcus Tate. He's the head of fuel integration on their end." "Thank you," Jhon said quietly. "Keep me posted." She hung up, no expression on her face, just calm. Back at the desk, Lucas was getting uncomfortable. He pulled William aside. "Do you realize who she is?" he whispered. "That's Jhon Emily. I saw her company on the vendor list last week, the new fuel deal with Atlanta Air." William's stomach turned. "Wait, what?" "Yeah, she owns Emily Aviation Solutions. They're working with us." William's mouth went dry. He looked back at Jhon, who hadn't moved, her boarding pass still in hand, no expression of anger, no confrontation. "Maybe we should just board her now," Lucas offered, but William panicked. "No, if we do it now, it looks like we..." He was cut off by a voice in his earpiece. A supervisor. "William, I need a status on the hold at gate 12. We're showing a delay flag." He froze. "Just handling a passenger issue, but it's under control." The supervisor didn't sound convinced. "Make sure it is. We've got execs from corporate flying in this morning. No surprises." William tried to steady his hands. He looked over at Jhon again. Her calm made him feel smaller by the second. He wasn't dealing with a problem, he was becoming one. Lucas turned toward her, ready to apologize, but just then, the boarding door beeped. Another passenger stepped through. A man in khakis glanced back and said, "What's going on with the holdup?" William didn't answer. His voice had disappeared. Then Jhon took a slow step forward, not toward the desk, but to the glass wall overlooking the runway. She stood there, hands folded behind her back, watching a line of fuel trucks move past. She wasn't in a rush. She wasn't anxious. She was watching time work in her favor. William was watching it run out. But the people in charge were already on their way. 10 floors above the airport terminal, in an office that overlooked the tarmac and the Atlanta skyline beyond it, Vanessa Holt was halfway through a bagel and a quarterly operations report when her desk phone rang. She didn't usually take calls from unknown numbers, but this one had been forwarded twice, and her assistant flagged it as urgent. "This is Vanessa," she answered. "Hi, Vanessa. Leona Carter calling on behalf of Jhon Emily, CEO of American Airlines. We've just been alerted to an incident involving Ms. Emily at gate 12. Vanessa sat up a little straighter. "What kind of incident?" Leona's voice remained professional. "Your staff seems to have denied her boarding despite her first-class ticket. We're concerned it may escalate." Vanessa didn't waste time asking for details. She had seen John's name enough to know the stakes. Atlanta Air had only recently finalized its supplier contracts for the next fiscal year, and Emily Aviation Solutions wasn't just any vendor, they were the vendor. They were supposed to help overhaul the airline's entire fuel logistics image after a disastrous social media campaign exposed their delays and inefficiencies. This wasn't just bad customer service, it was a live fire inside a room full of gas. "I'll handle it," Vanessa said quickly, standing up and motioning to her assistant. "Is she still at the gate?" "She is," calm but clearly being mishandled. Vanessa was already out of her office, jacket in hand, heels echoing down the hallway. She turned to her assistant. "Get me Derek and Naomi from Brand Protection, now." Meanwhile, down at corporate headquarters in Dallas, Marcus Tate's phone rang during a working lunch. "Marcus," Leona said, skipping formalities, "John's being detained at the gate, Hartsfield-Jackson. Atlanta air staff flagged her for no reason." Marcus nearly dropped his fork. "You've got to be kidding me." "Nope." She called it in personally. Marcus pushed back from the table. "I'll get Vanessa on it. She's already moving. You might want to prep legal, just in case." He didn't respond, just hung up and started dialing. If this went public, it could dismantle months of work on the new campaign rollout. There were press releases scheduled, launch videos and editing. Jhon Emily was going to be featured in their Fueling the Future initiative as a face of modern aviation efficiency. That face was now being sidelined at an airport gate by someone who didn't know who they were dealing with. At gate 12, William was beginning to sweat. Williams. He could feel the shift, not just from Lucas's icy silence, but from the passengers who were now openly murmuring about the delay. People were pulling out their phones, checking the flight status. Still no boarding. Then, without warning, a woman in a navy suit and an Atlanta Air ID badge walked briskly toward the gate, followed by a man in black loafers with a phone still pressed to his ear. Vanessa. She ended the call, lowered the phone slowly, and surveyed the scene. Jhon didn't move. She watched her approach, but didn't step forward. She knew exactly who she was. Vanessa extended her hand, calm but direct. "Ms. Emily, I'm Vanessa Holt, Executive Director of Regional Operations. May I speak with you privately?" Jhon nodded once, finally slipping her phone back into her pocket. "Of course." They stepped a few feet away. Behind them, William stood frozen, unsure whether to follow or disappear. Vanessa took a breath. "Ms. Emily, on behalf of Atlanta Air, I want to apologize. I've already contacted our internal team to look into the situation. This should not have happened. I'd like to escort you personally onto the flight." Jhon didn't react. She simply asked, "Do you know what seat I was assigned?" Vanessa checked her tablet. "Seat 1A. Jhon smiled faintly. "First row. Interesting. I was told this lane was for premium passengers only." Vanessa didn't blink. "Again, I apologize." Jhon leaned in slightly. The issue isn't the mistake, Ms. Holt. It's the assumption behind it. Vanessa swallowed hard, understood. But Jhon wasn't looking for payback. She was waiting for the truth. William stood behind the gate desk, motionless. His headset was still clipped to his collar, but he wasn't speaking into it anymore. He watched Vanessa and Jhon standing a few feet away, their conversation too quiet to hear, but loud enough to change everything. Passengers had stopped boarding. The monitors still showed the flight on time, but nothing was moving. Lucas avoided looking in William's direction. He didn't need to. Everyone at the gate already knew something was wrong. Vanessa turned to wave over another man, tall, sandy hair, black lanyard, corporate posture. This was Ethan Brooks, Atlanta Air's legal liaison for Southern operations. He'd been briefed in the elevator and knew better than to offer explanations. He extended his hand to Jhon. Ms. Emily, I'd like to apologize personally. I understand this experience has been... Jhon cut him off gently. I don't need an apology, Mr. Brooks. I need you to explain how something like this happens after we sign a $250 million deal. Ethan paused. There was no good answer, no scripted response, no PR-approved deflection. Vanessa stepped in. Ms. Emily, we understand the weight of the situation. We're reviewing our staff conduct and sensitivity training procedures, but we'd also like to assure you this isn't a reflection of our values. Jhon raised an eyebrow. You mean it's not a reflection of the company's values, or it's not a reflection of the gate agent's judgment? Vanessa didn't respond. Jhon gestured toward William, who now looked like he might sink behind the desk. He saw a well-dressed woman with a premium ticket and assumed she was in the wrong line. Not once, but repeatedly. Called for security, escalated the moment I asked a question. You don't have to explain to me what that's about. I've lived it. Ethan cleared his throat. We are prepared to issue a formal apology should you wish privately or publicly. John's face didn't change. You think I'm here for an apology? They hesitated. She reached into her garment bag and pulled out a thin manila folder, no fanfare, just paper. This is a signed copy of our contract. My company now supplies every drop of fuel on your southern and eastern routes. That includes the fuel used in your premium lounge shuttles, by the way. So when I say that the person being blocked at the gate is your brand, I mean that literally. She handed the folder to Vanessa, who took it like a weight. I don't want a tweet. I don't want a letter. I want better. Because the next person you treat like a security risk for doing absolutely nothing, they might not have a direct line to your VP. Silence. Passengers nearby began whispering again. A woman in the business class lane pulled out her phone, pretending to scroll, but clearly recording. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. We'll initiate an immediate review and make personnel adjustments as necessary. You have my word. Jhon looked at her watch. Good. Then we can all go about our day. Before Vanessa could escort her on board, she turned slightly and looked toward William. He looked pale now, holding his badge in both hands like a shield. Jhon stared at him for a second, not with anger, but with something worse, disappointment. She didn't speak to him. She didn't need to. Vanessa waved to the flight crew, who began unblocking the gate. Jhon was led down the jet bridge with Ethan quietly behind her. Back at the gate, Lucas stepped beside William. You don't get it, he said, his voice low. That woman's company fuels half the planes you see out there. William didn't answer, but the real moment wasn't in that conversation. It was what came next. The cabin crew had already been briefed. As Jhon stepped onto the plane, she was greeted not with the usual robotic smile, but with a level of attention that felt more like a quiet apology. A flight attendant named Carter offered to take her garment bag, and another immediately brought her a bottle of water without asking. Ms. Emily, if there's anything you need before takeoff, Carter said, almost under his breath, just say the word. Jhon didn't react much. She wasn't interested in gestures. She took her seat in 1A, placed the water down without touching it, and exhaled through her nose, not relief, just breath, controlled and measured. Outside, something strange was happening. The terminal had come to a crawl. Passengers were now checking the boards more often. First, Gate 12's status shifted from boarding to delayed. Then, within minutes, another 2 gates nearby changed to the same. A man in a gray blazer tapped on the desk at Gate 13, only to be told they were experiencing an internal systems review. It wasn't just John's flight. Across the concourse, 3 more Atlanta air departures were delayed, no specific reasons, just vague language. Operational hold, technical processing, crew coordination. In truth, corporate had issued a soft shutdown, a quiet pause. Vanessa Holt, after escorting Jhon on board, had walked straight into a secure meeting room behind the terminal. She was now on a call with legal, HR, and crisis management. The directive was clear. Before this incident spilled into the public, everything needed to be assessed: gate logs, staff notes, internal comms. Every employee who had direct contact with Jhon that morning was being pulled aside. No one would admit it out loud, but the plane wasn't going anywhere until the company knew exactly how far the damage might go. Back on board, Jhon sat with her eyes closed. She wasn't angry yet. She wasn't flustered, but her calm wasn't serenity. It was experience. The kind that comes from decades of having to pretend that things don't sting just because you're used to them. She thought about her father, Samuel, who once got turned away from a car dealership because the manager said he didn't look like he could afford it. She thought about her first investor meeting in Atlanta, where someone mistook her for the receptionist. And she thought about how, after all this time, it was still happening just at a higher altitude. Carter came back. "Ms. Emily," he said gently, "we've been asked to delay departure briefly. They're working through something with the terminal team. We'll keep you updated." Jhon nodded once. Carter hesitated, then added, "I saw what happened out there. It wasn't right." Jhon opened her eyes. "Thank you." Silence lingered for a second. Then Carter said, "I told my younger sister to watch your talk at the aviation conference last year. She's studying aerospace engineering. You made it feel real for her. Just thought you should know." Jhon looked at him for the first time since boarding, a small smile. Not performative, just human. "I appreciate that." As Carter walked away, the pilot stepped out of the cockpit and conferred with a senior crew member near the front. Their voices were low, but not low enough. Jhon caught a phrase, ground hold no idea how long, and somewhere in the back of the plane a man groaned audibly. "Figures. This airline never gets it together." Jhon didn't respond. She leaned back and watched the clouds drift outside the window. She'd done her part. The rest wasn't up to her. The internal report reached Vanessa's desk. The gate logs were clean, no threats reported, no disturbances filed. The only irregularity, a call made by the gate agent to security without documented reason. That alone was enough. By the time the flight finally began its pushback, William had been removed from the floor quietly. No announcement, no scene. His name didn't show up on the next day's schedule. A photo surfaced that afternoon. Someone in the terminal had snapped it. Jhon standing calmly near the gate, a phone to her ear, with the caption, "She didn't raise her voice. She didn't move." But the whole airport listened. But stories like this don't always end the way you'd expect. The plane touched down in Chicago. Jhon was one of the last to leave the aircraft, taking her time as passengers rushed toward ride shares, baggage claims, and connections. She didn't check her phone until she was already in the back of a black Lincoln headed toward the Hilton, where the National Aviation Summit was already underway. The notifications were stacked: emails from Atlanta Air, a text from Leona letting her know the legal team had reached out with a draft letter, and a link to a local news blog that had somehow picked up on the Hartsfield-Jackson incident. Nothing viral, nothing explosive, just a quiet ripple moving through the right circles. Inside the conference ballroom, the crowd was buzzing. Jhon entered unnoticed at first, but as she made her way to the side of the stage where her keynote was scheduled, a few attendees began to recognize her. She exchanged short greetings, shook a few hands, no mention of the airport, no sympathy, just business, the way she preferred it. She took the stage to a full room. Her keynote wasn't about what happened at Gate 12, not directly. It was about resilience in the aviation supply chain, about how small assumptions in logistics, in scheduling, in delivery create big consequences. She told a story about a fuel truck driver in Tennessee who nearly lost a contract to one missed delivery, and how that one delivery became a turning point in streamlining her company's communication systems. But toward the end, she paused. She looked out at the room, business people, suppliers, university researchers, logistics experts, and said, "Sometimes the problem isn't the system. Sometimes it's the shortcuts we take in reading people." There was a moment of stillness. She continued, "Whether we're talking about a new driver, a supplier, or someone standing at a gate with a valid boarding pass, what we assume tells the world more about us than it does about them." That got quiet applause, not thunderous, just real. Afterward, as Jhon walked off stage, a woman from a Denver logistics firm stopped her and said, "Hey, that thing you said about shortcuts hit me harder than I thought it would." Jhon smiled. "That's where the rot starts, in the shortcuts." Back in Atlanta, Vanessa Holt sat in her office reviewing a report from the internal audit team. William's file had been flagged, but Jhon hadn't asked for him to be fired. She hadn't asked for compensation. She hadn't even responded to the offer for a written apology to share publicly. She didn't need to. The airline's senior staff knew exactly what had happened, and they knew exactly how close they'd come to losing more than a contract. In the following weeks, Atlanta Air quietly announced a new partnership with a civil rights advisory group focused on workplace sensitivity and bias prevention. A few press outlets connected the dots. Jhon was mentioned once, indirectly, in a quote from an Atlanta Air spokesperson. Recent events reminded us of the work that still needs to be done. Jhon didn't comment, she didn't post, she didn't retweet. She went back to work. And when Leona asked if she wanted to talk to the press after a major outlet reached out for an interview request, she said, "Tell them I'm busy fueling planes." The story lingered not because it exploded online, but because people remembered it. People who were in the terminal that morning told it over dinner. People who saw the photo of her standing still with a phone to her ear started using it in presentations about silent leadership. People who worked at Atlanta Air whispered about it in break rooms. Gate agents started thinking twice before assuming, before reaching for a headset, before calling for backup without reason. And somewhere in Georgia, a retired school bus driver named Jhon Emily read the article online, smiled to herself, and said aloud in her kitchen, "That's my daughter." Sometimes the loudest thing you can say is nothing. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more stories that matter.